As a budding watch enthusiast, it took several purchases to figure out the kind of wristwatch I prefer to wear. My first three serious watch buys were these two Citizen Eco Drives and this Seiko Quartz. It's been close to 2 decades since those purchases, and if you were to ask me back then if I would have considered buying a vintage wristwatch, I would have replied no. But as of the time of this recording, late 2020, I have to say I think I prefer a vintage wristwatch over a modern one, and there's plenty of times I wish that wasn't the case. This video is by no means an attempt to get any of you into the vintage watch market. Quite the contrary. Buying a vintage watch is a pain in the butt. If you're not ready to do a bunch of research on the watch in question, you might not be paying for what you think you're getting. Issues such as trusting the dealer, of which you should never do, especially in the first encounter / transaction, and another issue such as spotting refurbished or redials. Some of these movements, the parts, they can be rare and very difficult to come by. There's just way too many landmines one needs to hurdle over when buying vintage. Why go through all that mess when you can buy new vintage? From the hand-wound mechanical movement to the high dome mineral crystal and the classic 60s style layout, the Merkur Seagull 1963 D304 is the best, most affordable example of a new vintage watch for less than $100. Now, I don't know if this watch is an actual reissue of a Seagull from 1963, and like many of you, I also noticed the striking resemblance to the Seagull 1963 Pilot Chronograph reissue, a watch I also own. I want to say the Merkur is also homaging the 1963 Pilot Chrono, but for all I know, Seagull could have made a watch just like this one back then. So for the sake of this video, let's just call this watch the Seagull 1963 Pilot Dress Watch by Merkur. When it comes to reissue and retro-inspired watches, it's all about the execution of vintage aesthetics. The design cues and proportions have to stimulate nostalgia for the past. The watch should look vintage and appear to be made the way watches were made then, while simultaneously incorporate modern materials with improved construction methods. Inside the stainless steel case, there's a time-only, hand-wound, center-second Chinese Seagull movement. I didn't get a chance to find out about the caliber, and I did try to open this watch up by unscrewing the case back, but my case back remover kept sliding off, so I gave up in fear of scratching it. They claim 41 hours of power reserve. I get high 30s on mine, 38, 39. Ticking at 21,600 beats per hour gives us a classic sweep. 30 meters of water resistance with a pull-push crown. No hacking there, as you can see. Domed mineral crystal that's almost as thick as the case itself, making this watch 12.1 millimeters tall. 44.8 millimeter lug-to-lug length, 38 millimeter case width, with a 20 millimeter lug width. This watch is a great watch for its size. Although a watch like this would have been at least 2 millimeters smaller back then, maybe more, being 38 millimeters big makes this watch versatile on most wrists. On above average sized wrists, this watch will look classically proportioned. The watch came with this metal band, and I quickly got rid of it. First, it's useless for us smaller wristed gents. Just take a look here. The watch would have to be that small for me to be able to wear this bracelet. It's useless. It feels like a hair puller, and it makes the watch look its price. Cheap. I bought this $20 Strapco leather band, that Strap Company, and I believe they make a great pair. One could easily think that this watch costs more. Since I've already started taking out the trash with this bracelet here, let's see what else I could pile on. The 7, 9, and 11 hour markers, they appear to be a little left to their mark. You can see that on the 55 and the 45 especially. I like that it has a signed crown, and unlike the Orient Bambino small second, it's not a shallow etching. This is nicely engraved. But the crown is just a little too small for a hand wound movement. It needs to be bigger. Setting and winding the watch feels a little rough. One could easily think that this watch may need a servancy. I guess we can fault the movement for that. The brushing on the handset looks a little weak to me, and I believe that there would be better continuity in the watch if the hands matched the hour markers and the indices. They should be polished. And is it just me, or did they cut off the tip of that hour hand? I'm sorry. It looks a little blunted compared to the tip of the minute marker, the minute hand. Why am I confusing those two? Out of the 5 watches featured so far on the Dapper Wrist, this watch has the most cons. Yet I find myself making a video about it. Why? That face. Just look at that face. This is where Merkur gets things right. The dial's color is vibrant with a combination of eggshell white and a lightly golden hue. The dial is also domed. This is an aesthetic I'm always glad to see. It gives the dial complexity and refinement. And it's in the outermost edges of that dial where we find the 5-minute intervals in numeric form, double-digit numeric form, as well as the second and minute hashes printed in black. But there's more. Take a good look at that minute and second hand. Curved at the tip. Let's wait for that second hand to come around so that you can see both. Don't mess it up. You see it? This is classically functional. These details, along with how the second hand reaches that far out, are some of the best hallmarks of a watch from the past. Applied numerals and hour markers have always attracted my eye from the very beginning. And a combination of both, even more so. The perfect symmetry and the appropriate handset makes the Seagull 1963 Pilot Dress Watch by Merkur precise and easy to read. I'm also a big fan of that red star. The red appears to be painted on the dial with the gold outline logo, the star actually, the gold outline star, being glued on. A neat trick that gives the appearance of an applied logo. I'm assuming the characters to the right of the 19 mean jewels, but I have no idea what the three characters above the 6 could read. If you do, please leave a comment below. The case is typical of 60s casual / dress watches with a polished bezel. The sides are polished as well, including the back. And the top of the lugs appear to be slightly brushed. Barely even noticeable. I even question myself whether to call that brushing. One of my reasons for saying earlier that I prefer vintage wristwatches over a modern one is due to size. I have a 6¼ inch wrist, and odds are a vintage wristwatch is going to look better proportioned on my wrist than a modern one. But fortunately for me, the Seagull 1963 Pilot Dress Watch by Merkur does not make the mistake done too often of reissuing or homaging a watch so far from its original size that only the wristed endowed get to have their fun. So I bought the watch, paid way too much for shipping, and waited quite a bit due to COVID. But when it arrived and I put it on for the first time, I knew I made a good purchase, even with that cheap bracelet and the quality control issues. This watch is cool. I mean, how could it not be? It's basically the 1963 Pilot chronograph reissue without the chrono function. It fits great, and I'm having a lot of fun wearing it. So if you'd stayed till the end of the review, do me another favor and like the vid. Subscribe. Even if you don't mean it. I won't trip.